Amen. Thank you. All right. I always get nervous when students pray that they'll be able to stay awake. That's one of the hardest prayers for God to answer, isn't it? Online students, just so you'll know, the camera is not working today, so we'll just put you on the full screen so you can see that, all right? But the camera's not functioning today. All right, we looked at this map before, right? And somebody asked me afterwards, what's this little tiny blue spot right up there? I think it's just a spot that I forgot to color in when I was creating the map, so whatever the case. All right, today we are going to talk about Anglo cultures, or the Anglo cluster, right? So here it is, Anglo North America, Anglo Great Britain or UK, and Anglo Australia, New Zealand, all right? And so it's all spread out. Why? Yeah, right. Great Britain, the tiniest of it all, you would never know if you didn't know your history that something this tiny was responsible for so much colonization, you know, and anglicizing. What does the word Anglo mean, or where does it come from? Yeah, yep. It's the anglicized form of the word English, right? So the Anglican Church is the English church, okay? And now I'm assuming too, we don't really get into this in this cluster, but I'm assuming you guys have studied a little bit about the Anglican Church and where it came from, because that has a big influence also. Who was the guy that kind of founded the Anglican Church? He's probably the most, yeah, I was going to say the most famous, the most infamous, perhaps, of all the English kings. Yeah. And do you remember why he founded it? Does anybody remember what the circumstance was, Abby? Yep. The Pope would not allow him to divorce his wife, so he says, okay, you're on your own. I'm going to do it my way. And the Anglican Church, of course, became quite varied over the years. Much of it is very Catholic in its basic, religious system and practice. There are Anglicans who are true born-again Christians. Probably one of the ones that's most famous that we would know of today is John Stott, or John R.W. Stott. In fact, one of my predecessors used to use his Romans commentary as the main textbook for the book of Romans. He also is known as a missiologist, John Stott. And there are other Anglicans who have played a significant role in the evangelical movement, the broader evangelical movement, definitely not Catholic in their persuasion. So there's a variety, but that did influence what happened around the world in the colonization process, okay? All right, so let's get my, okay, all right, let me just go beyond these. We did these other ones last time, so I'll click through them here. All right, there we go. Anglo cultures. All right, there they are. And by the way, here's the place that I use to create the map. It's called mapchart.net. These are free. So if you're into that sort of thing, or you're teaching something that involves geography, there you go. So mapchart.net. Okay, a couple of dominant characteristics of Anglo cultures. Okay. Number one, personal space and hygiene are very important, right? Why do you suppose it is that Anglos, what we'll call ourselves Anglos, those of us who are from this cluster, why do you suppose that personal space is such a big deal for us? What in our background may have caused that? Val? Yeah, part of it is the idea of independent. The closer I am to people, the more I feel like I'm connected to them. Yeah, that's part of it. Good. There's at least one other factor that's very much an objective factor, something very observable. Why we like space. Well, the simple answer is because we have it. That's what number 2 is really, letter B is really all about. Anglo cultures originated in places with lots of wide open land. See, I mean, think of America, the push to the west, you know, there really was no limit. I mean, there was, but it didn't seem like it. Just head west and see what we can find. If you studied Lewis and Clark, you know, 1803, which is the year that Ohio actually becomes a state, Thomas Jefferson sends them out, and they begin in Ohio, and they actually catch malaria down on the Ohio River. You know, we think of malaria, we think of Africa, you know, but they got malaria, and but they ended up heading all the way out to what is today Oregon. So, an amazing story. Now, you might not think of wide open spaces as much when you think of the British Isles, but you know, even though it's a small area, they still enjoyed a lot of opportunity for expansion. Of course, Australia, you know, the outback. So that has contributed to it as well. And how many of you, just out of curiosity, grew up on an acreage? I mean, let's say you had at least an acre. Okay, okay. I grew up on an acre lot. Anybody grew up on larger than that? How many acres did you have, Abby? Yep. Oh, yeah, still. 5 acres. Yeah, up there in the UP. And I mean, the UP itself would be characterized like this. Yeah. How about you? Okay. Yeah. And at least, you know, now if you grew up on a farm, you know, then that kind of blows the whole thing out of the water. But this is an interesting characteristic. Okay, let's move on. Other characteristics of the Anglo cluster. Number 2, well, what's the first language? Okay, that should be no-brainer. It'll be easy on you here in finals week or midterm week. English. Now, not all English is English, right? Hey, look, if you go to visit the UK, whatever you do, don't tell them that they speak with a British accent. You want to get yourself in big trouble. Why? Why don't you tell them that? Yeah. Exactly. When you say British accent, you're suggesting an offshoot of English, right? And they're saying, we don't speak with any accent at all. You guys are the ones that speak with an accent, and they are right. That's funny. Yep. Just like it'd be like a Brazilian going to Portugal and saying, you speak with a Portuguese accent. Don't do that either. They would. They tear the Portuguese up in jokes and stuff like you wouldn't believe. Some of it's pretty funny, actually, but still. All right, the populations are predominantly white. Now, did you ever notice that sometimes when you fill out a form and it's asking your skin color, that white is not an option? Have you ever noticed that? What is normally on the forms that you fill out as an option for your ethnic appearance? What's the word that's normally used? Caucasian, which I'm not even sure where that came from. I guess I'm Caucasian, but if you were to ask me what is Caucasian, can anybody help me? Where the word Caucasian comes from? Because most of you are Caucasian. Yeah. Why do we avoid the word white? Well, because what is white? Nobody in this room is white. If you really want to, this is white, right? This paper. So Caucasian is a little bit more, obviously white has political nuances, but we avoid that. I remember there were times I've looked at that list and I said, I don't think I'm any of these. But, you know, you have to choose one. And Caucasian is the normal one. Okay. All right. It is the most geographically diverse cluster due to the influence of the British Empire. And you just look at those three regions and remember that the British Empire isn't limited to the Anglo cluster. I mean, tell me some of the places where the British had colonies. Yeah, India. Yeah, big time. Where else? Yeah, a lot of African. Is that what you're going to say, Izzy? Yeah, yeah, lots of it. And now, did good things come out of that? Well, yes, there were good things that came out of it. I mean, English, like it or not, English is the most sought after language in the world. Now, the most spoken language is, which language is spoken by more people than any other language? Sharon? Chinese. Yeah, Mandarin, there are different kinds of Chinese. Mandarin is the most spoken of any language in the world. But the most sought language globally is English. Okay, and why is that? Yeah, business, internet, there are more English sources than any other. Look up, do you ever go on Wikipedia when you first go on their site and they ask you what language you want to, pull up? There are more sources. Now that is equalizing somewhat over time, but still English has the most options for research, for stuff like that. So it's not because it's easy to learn. English, if you speak English as a native language, be thankful that you didn't have to learn it. Because English is horrible to learn. It's so full of exceptions and broken rules and things like that. People go nuts trying to learn it. I was thankful Portuguese, as Spanish would be, was very much a phonetic language, fairly consistent to its phonics. We are not. And a lot of reasons for that. All right, but British Empire. So we mentioned, the British colonies in Africa, in India. By the way, they weren't the only ones. There was the Dutch East India Company as well. The Africa, the Dutch were right up close in competition with the English. Now, if you talk to the British, they will tell you historically that they weren't interested in conquering. They were interested in trade. And they will tell you, at least to some degree, that the reason they got involved in wars was because their trading was being threatened. And so they had to default to war in order to protect their trade interests. But the fact of the matter is, most wars involve a lot of economic, stuff anyway. So anyway, I'm just telling you that, and there's some truth in that. It's not that they were necessarily trying to take over the world. They wanted to establish trade routes that would ensure their, but anyway, quite a history. Quite a history. Well, all right, it counts for 7% of the world's population. Now, this is a few years, this is probably 10 years old, so you may find something a little different. But 40% of the what? What's GDP? Gross domestic product, right. In other words, the money involved in trading and that sort of thing. Yeah, 40% controlled by this cluster. And that would be primarily North America and Great Britain. Australia would also play a role, but not nearly as large of a role economically. Now you look at that, and if you're not from the Anglo world, how might you evaluate that? What might your reaction be to those numbers? Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. And we are, the Anglo cluster would be considered rich by anybody else's evaluation. How else might you react to that? Yeah, this isn't fair. There's an unhealthy disproportion of wealth in the world. Yeah. And the fact is, there is. But it's also a fact that it's going to be that way until the Lord comes back. That's part of living in a fallen world. Yeah. And it's not just the Anglos, okay? It's the West in general. I think you can bring the whole Western world into that discussion. Yeah. Okay. Good, good. All right. So, just historically, in AD 410, Rome removed its army from Britain. Now, when did Rome enter the British Isles? Well, there was some conquering going on under the reign of Claudius Caesar. Claudius is the one that followed, well, okay, you had Caesar Augustus, then you had Tiberius, and then Claudius came. There were a few that were only in for a couple of years, but Claudius was the main one after him. Then you had Nero and so on. But Claudius was already doing some work to bring the British Isles into the Roman Empire, and that's way back in the early part of the millennium. And but in 410, Rome finally removed its army from Britain, and that's because Rome was starting to crumble at that time. Okay, already they were losing their influence. But why do I mention that? Because when you study the Anglo culture, you also kind of have to study the Roman culture as well. There was a lot of influence of the Roman Empire. That's more true when you get to the European Latin culture. All right, in the late 400s, Germanic influence gained kinship in the kingdom. So the Roman influence moved out, and Germanic influence moved in. Now that's probably an oversimplification, but there's a lot of Germanic influence. So when you study the Germanic cluster, which we will, that's another thing to keep in mind. Part of our heritage does come from Germanic influence. Okay? Who are the history people who like to study this stuff? Go back and dig this stuff up. Anybody? You like that? Good, good. Feel free to chime in, because I'm not a historian. Okay, good. That's a good answer, I like that. And then the Anglo-Saxons became so united eventually that the name Saxon eventually disappeared. So we call this the Anglo cluster. We don't call it the Anglo-Saxon cluster. Historically, we could, but they kind of became melded. If you want a good comparison to that, the southern kingdom in Israel was called Judah. And yet what other tribe was also part of that? There was one other tribe that was part of the Judah kingdom. Benjamin. Right. But you never call it the Judea or the whatever. It's just called Judah, because Benjamin was fairly small. And so what happens is the Germanic influence eventually becomes kind of swallowed up by the Anglo influence, and so it's now known today as the Anglo culture. Okay? All right. You still hear the phrase Anglo-Saxon once in a while. Yep. Okay. Continuing on, nearly all have central and western frontier lands. I mean, think of our country. Even now, how much land is still available out west? There's tons of land. There's all kinds of room for moving and settling in. Now, it's not. Some would argue that some of that land is not really, not really livable or tough. My mother-in-law grew up on a 10,000-acre ranch in South Dakota, near Rapid City. Most of that land was tumbleweeds, so it really wasn't farmable. It wasn't. So even though 10,000 sounds like a lot, man, they must have been rich. No, not really. They weren't. But a lot of open land, frontier lands. Let me ask you a question related to this. Hi, Pam. Are you on today or not? I can't remember what we decided. It's after break. Okay. I'm sorry. You probably told me that at least 3 times, and I keep forgetting. I need to take notes, like the speaker said today in chapel. Yeah. Okay, let me ask you a question. What was it in America that spearheaded the pioneer movement moving out west, the westward expanse? Yeah, gold was, I mean, it was already happening, but in 1849, yeah, that kind of gave it a big boost. Yeah. Okay, gold was one. Even before that, however, people were already wanting to move that way. Yeah, good. What else might have influenced that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, the independent thing that you mentioned earlier, I think, Val. Yes, exactly. I mean, you could have a lot of land. The federal government was offering some really lucrative deals. You could buy land cheap, have a lot of land. Obviously, high risk was tied into that, right? One of the things that I didn't know until just recent years was that when this happened, it wasn't, the Christian community was much less excited about going west. I'm not saying that no Christians did, but by comparison, the Christians seemed to be a little bit more content to be where they were. God had given them, a nice place to live and to minister. Whereas the unbeliever, by comparison, was more excited about getting out on his own and having his own place. That's an oversimplification. There were people on both sides, there crossover on that. But that was an observation that I read a few years ago, and it probably makes some sense. Okay. The fact is, we did need Christians on the frontier, and there were some that became circuit riding preachers, and the Methodists were huge in the circuit riding preacher movement, and many of them felt that their place of ministry was on the frontier to help people to have a godly heritage, out there. So fascinating. Yeah, think about this. All of this, at least from North America's standpoint, we're so young. We're just spoiled brats that grew up fast and made ourselves. That's the way the mother country tends to see it. In fact, I was talking to someone, and by the way, I love the British. I love visiting. They're wonderful people. But I was talking to one time to somebody who is American living in Great Britain. We're talking about the American Revolution, and immediately the person responded by saying, most Americans don't understand that when we fought you guys in the Revolutionary War, we were fighting 3 other wars at the same time. What was he trying to tell me? He's trying to tell me that bragging about your victory maybe isn't all that you have it cracked up to be. You Americans have really shined that thing and made a big deal of it. But we were fighting 3 other wars at the same time. And they were. but then the American retorts and says, yeah, but when you see what God did here, and so, there's where if you have Christians on both sides of the fence, they both come to an understanding, God eventually, was providentially leading all this to pass. But it is fascinating. All right, letter F. There are oceans on both sides. Look at all of them. Look at the United States, from sea to shining sea. Look at Great Britain, lots of ocean on several sides. Look at Australia, same thing, right? So that's a characteristic. So we are used to having, our own independence, not just as individuals living within the cluster, but as a cluster itself. We are used to having our own space, sea to sea. There's constitutional tolerance for free speech. Is it being challenged? Oh, you guys know that. There are people who like to shut down free speech, right? For certain ones. But that has been a characteristic of the Anglo culture, Anglo cluster, free speech. Free speech can be variously defined. It doesn't mean the same thing everywhere you go. For example, in Great Britain, even though free speech is a liberty that they have, at least at some eras, if you spoke out against the king publicly, you could end up in a noose. So, here, I don't think that's happened, at least in recent years. H, there is a desire to welcome legal immigrants. Even as I put these up here, you guys are thinking of issues going on, right? This is a hot button in the news, as you know. When President Biden was elected, immediately some 2 million illegal immigrants were allowed to flood into the country. And when people spoke up against that, they were accused of being, racist or whatever. And they were saying, no, we're not right. We love immigrants. We just want them to come in legally. We want them to follow the norm. We can't have anarchy here. And so, that's become a big political issue. And I think if you talk to the average American, you'll find that we welcome immigrants, but we want it to be done legally and decently and in order. Okay? What's the North American icon of welcoming immigrants into our land? Statue of Liberty. And who made the Statue of Liberty? France. Interesting, isn't it? A gift given to us. Anybody been up to Statue of Liberty? Yeah. We took the boat out near, but we didn't actually go up in it. I'd love to someday. So, desire to welcome legal immigrants. Veterans Day or Remembrance Day, we've changed the names of some of I like the word Veterans Day. It emphasizes the people who gave their lives in wars. In other words, okay, what does the fact that we celebrate Veterans Day communicate? What message are we sending when we celebrate Veterans Day? Yes, there's a sacredness of human life that also characterizes the Anglo world. And not just the Anglo world, but it does. And so the fact that we would take time to remember those who gave their lives speaks, very highly of the value we place on human life. Mm-hmm. Is that being challenged? Yes, it is. Yeah. Any of you here have relatives, like immediate family that served in the military? Look at several of you. Yeah, that's great. My dad was in the Air Force. Okay. All Anglo, where are we here? Yeah, number 3. All Anglo countries are related as members of a family, okay? So there is a familyness about the Anglo culture, even though we're so spread out. Britain being the mother, and others her children. So let's before we fill in these blanks, we have A, B, C, and D here, and then E is a kind of a summary statement. What country would you put in letter A, the child that's most like its mother? What country in the Anglo cluster would you say is most like Great Britain? Canada. The Queen is still acknowledged in Canada. In fact, and they still sing "God Save the Queen." Now, not every Canadian. Who are the Canadians here? We have in our class. Okay, so I don't want to. The Canadians in our campus could speak much more clearly than I, but there is still very much a respect for the Queen of England, who the longest standing or sitting. How do you say that? Sitting queen or standing queen? I don't remember. She's the longest to hold office of anybody now on the face of the earth. All right. Which one would you put for letter B, the rebellious child who became successful? Yep, that'd be us. That's the image. So we boast on what we've done in 240, how is it now? Some years, 47? No, 45 years, 245? We boast about that. They would say you're just upstart brats. You're like the rich brat that has everything. So that goes back and forth. What about C, the resentful but dependent child? One of you said it earlier. Pam, did you say it? Yeah, Australia. Australia, and I don't understand enough about the Australian culture to speak to that. I just picked this up. Yeah. And again, we're being very stereotypical here. Not every Australian would necessarily say that. What about D? Which one is more like a cousin in a strained relationship than a child? It's perhaps more loosely included in the Anglo cluster. Any guesses on that one? Give you a hint, it's somebody that's, oops, I just gave it to you, sorry. Ireland. It's more like a cousin in a strained, yeah. So now, again, some people from these places may argue with you on that, but it seems to be a general characteristic. The point is that we're all part of the same family, okay, the same roots. My roots, my wife and I on our 40th have thought about maybe going to England. We have an idea from Ancestry.com where our ancestors may have come from there, and we'd like to take a trip there and maybe do some hunting here online, but then go there and see if we can find some records and do some digging around there. Who else here has ancestors that came from Great Britain? England per se, or? Okay, all right, quite a variety then. Yeah, and who else? Okay, that's cool. It's cool to even be able to know that, you know. That's anybody else come from that neck of the woods? All right. And then there's a growing sense of loyalty among the members of this cluster. Obviously, our relationship with England is very different than it was during the Revolutionary War. Who would ever have thought that? You remember George Washington? I don't know if you know this, but he made the statement somewhere, I don't know if it was during or after the war, he said, I will never, ever set foot on British soil. And so the English wanted to make a statue of George Washington, and they did, but they actually brought American soil to England, and they put the soil underneath the statue so that he would not be sitting directly on British soil. I think it's actually in London. I don't remember if we were in London, but we did a quick tour. But they honored him, his desire never to sit on British soil. Yeah, you got to laugh sometimes, but you know, obviously, if he were living today, you know, he would see things quite differently. Yeah, I mean, the two world wars really brought England and the United States together, right? In fact, the British really teased us for taking so long. You know, it's about time you showed up. You know, and if you'd have come here sooner, we would. And they had a point, but we had the Neutrality Act. You know, and so we had to be. It took the bombing of Pearl Harbor to change all that. So we have a good relationship with England today. We really do. Unless we're playing soccer against them or something like that. What are the driving cultural values of this culture? So what we're going to do is we're going back now to those 10 cultural values that we reviewed, remember last time. And so which ones really seem to stand out? And again, we can't be exhaustive here, but here's some ideas. Risk. So are we high risk or low risk? Yeah. Give me an example we've already talked about today, something that we're known for that's risky. Pardon? It was something we talked about earlier today that's a characteristic of the Anglo cluster that really implies risk. Yeah, the whole frontier movement. I mean, you had to really let go of everything that was secure to you, and you took chance. And some people lost everything when they moved out. And there were diseases out there, and there were the Native Americans out there as well. Notice I didn't call them Indians, because, you know, as bright of a guy as he was, Christopher Columbus got it wrong. He thought he'd reached the West Indies. They named them all Indians, and we're not. I say we because I'm 1/16 Native American. I don't know which tribe, but my dad was 1/8 Native American. So I could probably get some government aid if I really went after it. I don't know. I'm not going to try. But, it was risky. All right. On an uncertainty avoidance scale of 1 to 100, the Anglo cluster scores 30. In other words, the 1 would be no uncertainty avoidance. Okay? The 100 would be a lot of uncertainty avoidance. So we're way down there at 30, which means we're more high risk. What else about the Anglo culture suggests risk? Besides the westward expansion, frontier movement, and all that. Yeah, capitalism is, and we talked about that before, capitalism is a risky venture. Not risky in the sense that we're not gambling. It's not that like that. But it does involve risk. And there are different levels of risk. My wife and I happen to be at an age right now where our investments are a little bit more, low to medium risk, because we can't afford. You guys can do more high risk investing, because if you lose it now, you can still, make it up, assuming that Jesus doesn't come back tomorrow. If he does, who cares? Yeah. It's the only cluster that desires less avoidance than it already has. Even in the sports world, where do you find risk? I think we talked about this once before, too, when we were talking about risk. A lot of Americans are getting really like what kinds of sports, that a certain type of sport that actually embodies risk. Yeah, but I'm thinking of now that escaped me. Yeah. What do you call those kind of sports? Huh? Pardon? Extreme, yeah. Aren't they called extreme sports? Is that yeah. Mm-hmm. And they've become, there was a time when you would never have included those kinds of sports in the Olympics. They were considered, but now, although you did have other kinds of things in the early Greek Olympics that we might not include today. With lions and things. All right, individualism is another one that's very much part of our rights, freedom, responsibility. Woo, yeah, there you go. Rights, freedom, responsibility, big deals. And personal space we already mentioned, but I'll put it up there again. We like our personal space. So, was COVID more difficult or less difficult for us because of that? What effect did COVID have on our culture being what it is? Yeah, Val? Oh, boy, you nailed it. You nailed it. People didn't mind having the space. Look, we went to chapel and we had more space. I actually enjoyed that, But we didn't like being told. Yeah, boy, that you got it right on the money. Yep, that's exactly right. Yeah, other countries they're a little less comfortable with the space, but they've been used to being told. They're more collectivistic, and they didn't even give it a second thought. Okay, then there's everybody in the middle. Yeah, fascinating. We're planning a Boston trip. I don't know if you already saw it on the monitor there. We just had a meeting yesterday with Bill Edmondson and Pastor Toby Stevens, and we did this last year. We're going to do another one this year. In fact, if you're interested, talk to me. August 6th through 12. And they said that the city of Boston is moving more away from the mask mandates, but Cambridge, which is right there, it's like Ankeny and Des Moines, Cambridge is still wrestling with it, and that's where Pastor Toby's church is. That's where we'll be spending a lot of our time. They're still hesitant to lift the mandate. So, yeah, quite interesting. Competition. Oh, do we love competition? And Liz, capitalism. What makes capitalism what it is? A big part of it is just competing on the market. Yep. Tit for tat. Creating win-win relation. We like that. We don't want to be viewed as trying to, just pound everybody else in the dust. We want to win, but we want to win in such a way that it makes it look like the loser won too. I can say that, I'm an American, right? I heard one guy once say, you remember way back when in the 1980s when, the attack on, what country over there? In the Mideast. Help me out. This is before Desert Storm. Yeah. No. Farther back. Huh? Kuwait. I heard one American say when we went in and when Kuwait was an issue, I heard an American say, well, they asked for some help over there and they asked if we would help. We said, well, sure, why not? We'll go over and help. We'll be good big brother. And I thought, well, that's a nice way for an American to put it, but that's really not what happened. We had interests in Kuwait, and we made sure that we got something out of it, which isn't all bad. But we do like win-win relationships. Paying back for favors. I think we talked about this before. Somebody takes you out for dinner and pays a nice big bill for you to eat. What do you say to them on the way out as your parting company? Maybe nobody's done that for you before. Yeah, next time it'll be our turn. We feel compelled to say that, because we don't want to feel, well, you help me. You fill in the blank. Why do we feel it's necessary to come back with something like that? Yeah, we hate the idea of being indebted to somebody. Yes. Being indebted gives you a feeling of inferiority, and we don't want that. So we say, next time, yeah. And I've done that. Man, I've done that so much. Somebody brings over a nice dessert or something. Even on May Day, you ever have somebody drop off something at your door at May Day, and you feel like, man, we got to do something for them. We can't just take this for nothing. I don't take charity. You heard that one before, right? Same idea. I don't want to be indebted to you. Yeah, good answer. All right. Doing is another one. And we've talked about this before too. We are very much a doing culture. Although I do think, pun intended, that's changed somewhat. I think that Americans over the years, maybe if just a little bit, have learned that it's not all about doing. There's been an emphasis in recent generations on relaxing, taking time, even if the motive is wrong. You deserve a break today. I mean, even that was a McDonald's commercial when I was growing up. You deserve a break today. Where? At McDonald's. So you go to McDonald's, take your break, and you stand in line. Actions speak louder than words. Well, that's a big thing. We like to say that as Anglos. Actions speak louder than words, and they do. The British Empire did not begin as one unifying vision. This reflects one of the nuances of the Anglos. They are unusually open societies. Yeah. Think about it. The British, again, their motive at the beginning was trade. So the expansion of the British Empire was very gradual, and it was built on the trade phenomenon. And so, they were used to being open societies and not oppressive that way. John Darwin, I don't think he's in any relation to Charles, said the hallmark of British imperialism was its extraordinary versatility in method, outlook, and objective. And that's true. The British could go to India, they could go to Africa, they go wherever they wanted to go, and they learned how to make their system work in those cultures. Which, now think about it. We talk about a colonialism where you try to implant your culture on somebody else's. Yes, that happened. But they also knew when it was to their advantage to do it the African way or to do it the Indian way and not the British way. Okay? And they were very adaptive in that sense. And they even got the local indigenous people to collaborate in their own colonization. Why? So that they would feel like it was their initiative and not that of the British. So they were geniuses when it came to knowing how to adapt their methods to the local ways and even involve the local people in order to give them a feeling of, this is your project. Right? I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I'm just saying that's what they did. And then short-term time orientation. Now this is probably more true in North America and Australia. Britain, being so much older than the others, is less short-term, it's more long-term. Remember we said the older the country is, the more long-term they tend to be in the way they view things, okay? But that's a general characteristic. Short-term time oriented. Quick wins are very important. It's something that you can flash up there and it makes an impression. And two, performance seeks for immediate results. We talked before about the first 100 days in office of a new president. If he doesn't do anything in 100 days, it's going to be hard for him to make up for it afterwards. That's true in the investing world too. Capitalism likes to do a lot of, of small wins, building up to the bigger wins. All right. Well, most Anglo cultures, number 5, score similarly in the 10 dimensions or values. I don't know if you've gotten this clear by now, but values and dimensions are 2 words that we're using interchangeably that first part of the semester. But there are a couple of exceptions to this. We're not all the same. For example, white South Africa has a wider power distance orientation. Okay, what was it in South Africa that had to come down? Remember that? What big problem in South Africa had to be resolved? What was that called? Where the white majority ruled the white minority ruled the black majority. What was the name of that? I know you know it. It starts with an A. Apartheid. You guys have all studied that? The word apartheid means separation. It was the idea of the white majority, and that was because of the British, system, the colonialization that took place. But apartheid broke that down, and there's a movie out. I don't remember the name of the movie, but it's about Nelson Mandela, that whole apartheid thing that happened. And if I remember the name of the movie, I'll tell you. But it was pretty interesting. Okay, so that would be an exception. Another exception: New Zealand has more government involvement in the day-to-day life of its people than most others in the Anglo cluster. And this may be due to its size and isolation. It's smaller and it's more isolated. So it's not something that would characterize the Anglo cluster in general, but its local immediate circumstances make that a reality. And then C, Americans don't stay long in China, but neither do they in the UK, because of significant differences that are often unnoticed. So what kind of differences are the most difficult for you to process? The big differences, like you'd find going to a place like China, or the more subtle differences going to a place like the UK? Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. You don't really prepare for that, do you? You just assume that you're going to be fine because we're so similar. And then things begin to bother you. Yeah. I sensed that when I went to England. Even some of the words you used, and of course, driving on the left side of the road, I never tried that because I didn't trust myself. I got an international driver's license, but I didn't do it. Yeah. I think you're right. I think it's the subtle ones. You prepare for the big ones. It's just like the Christian life. The big trials that come along, we trust God, we see, we're ready. But it's those little things that happen to you that trip you up, that same thing happens culturally. Yeah. I remember when I went to Peru, I speak Portuguese, and I thought, it should be fairly easy. But man, it was frustrating. The differences were subtle, just subtle differences. And I was able to figure out what the preacher was talking about. Once I figured the context, the passage, I could follow. But man, trying to speak Spanish was just really tough. Now, for a native Brazilian, maybe not so much. I don't know, have you ever tried Portuguese? Oh, yeah? Hmm. Say that again. It's easier for who to understand who? Understand Spanish than the other way around. Interesting. Well, it wasn't for me, but I'm not a native Portuguese speaker either. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Yep. Yeah, so watch out. If God takes you, just like here in the States, say, oh, home missionary, no culture. No. For some of you coming to faith, what's culture shock? Right, Izzy? Pamela, coming to faith? Yeah. So, let's have a little quiz, just a little fun here. Who is a typical American? And this is just a fun quiz, okay? It's just to kind of get your thinking going here. So number one, and here's what I want you to do. Before you fill in the blanks here, let's just kind of take these and go through them, and you give me your ideas. So here, I'll put them up on here because I think the answers come later. How close is the nearest Walmart to your home? Anybody live in a place where you have to drive half hour to get to Walmart? Any of you? You do? 45 minutes. Where is it? Marquette. Okay, all right. Nearest Walmart is 45 minutes. Daniel? Okay, about a half hour away. Right, anybody else? Yeah, Hannah? Hour to Walmart. What city is it in? Okay, all right. So how often do you go to Walmart? Only when there's nowhere else to get it. Huh? Anybody else have a long drive to Walmart? What about in Peru? They have Walmart there, right? No? Oh, okay. Yeah. You have big stores like, yeah, big box. How about in Chile? Yeah. Yeah. We have that in Brazil too, a place that's owned by Walmart, but they use a different name. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Cool. So the rest of it, here in Ankeny is 5 minutes, right? Okay. So we'll do the answers later because there was a little bit of a research done on this. Do you believe you are living the American dream? What's the American dream? Well, that's part of the answer. What do you mean by American dream? Do you realize that there was a time when living the American dream meant that every household had a car? And now, for many people, the American dream is everybody who's 16 or over has a car, right? Bill Gates had a dream. Someday, there will be a desktop computer in every home. Imagine that. And now, I got more power on this than the moon launch did in 1969, you know? Yeah. So what's the American dream? I don't know. You ever hear somebody say, hey, how you doing? I'm living the dream. You know? Henry Ford, when they first started manufacturing cars, you know, on a mass level like that, you know, he had that saying. He was trying to promote, you know, advertise to get everybody to have a car. And he said to them, you can have any color you want as long as it's black. That's the only color they had at that time. You know, he just started mass production, and so that was one of his, you know, humorous selling points. You can have any color you want as long as it's black. By the way, spring break, we're hoping to, you guys be in Michigan and Corral, we're hoping to visit the Henry Ford Museum. You guys could do something like that? You gonna be down that area? Oh yeah, Grand Rapids area. That's a little more spiritual than going to the Henry Ford. All right. So, we'll see what that research says in just a minute. Are you tolerant of all races? Now, boy, tolerant. Again, I'm just using the word they used here. I probably wouldn't use that word because you can tolerate most anything. You can hate somebody but tolerate them, right? So I'm not sure if that's even the best word, but that's the word that was used in the research that was done. Can you name the Three Stooges? Okay, who are the Three Stooges? They're actually, who are they? Close. What was the first one you said? Yeah, Larry, Curly, and Moe. And then later on, this is the extra credit question, they added another one. Shemp. You guys didn't know this stuff? Man, you call yourself an American? You didn't know it? Who's the Peruvian Larry Curly? Okay, if you've never, look, if you like absolutely silly, stupid humor, watch The Three Stooges. I mean, it is stupid, but it's funny. I really like it, to an extent. Larry, Curly, and Moe. All right. Okay. Ooh. Oh, come on. What are the three branches? Yeah, Hannah. Okay, I'm guessing that you guys all could handle that. And even in Chile and Peru, they probably have the same three branches. Brazil does. If it's a republic, you know. Yeah, wait till we come back to the answer to that one. Do you prefer smooth or chunky peanut butter? What do you like? Smooth or chunky? That's a stupid question. It's a fun, we're just doing this for fun. Why? Especially when it sticks in your teeth. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Who knows if they're even peanuts, right? You don't know what they put in there. Yeah. Did anybody here have a peanut grinder in your house? You can actually make peanut butter? In Brazil, we had a little bitty thing. We had a garage sale. Zzz, chops them up and you got real peanut butter. And, you know, you ever notice you go through the chunky peanut butter a lot faster just because the chunks, you tend to grab it in clobs? So what does this have to do with our, well, just hang on. Do you live in the state where you were born? Now, just forget college for a minute, but when you go home, okay, you go home where you grew up. Who else? If you go home, you're back, okay, Manistee, back home. Okay, you're going home. Huh? Yeah. No, but when you go back to Peru, do you live in the place where you grew up, or have you moved? Has your family moved? You've never moved. How about in Chile? Did you guys move around? Probably because of the nature of your work. Yeah. Yeah, man, I don't. I'm a Buckeye, and my brother still lives back. He lived up in the UP. Now he's back there. All right, so let's go back and see how the research that was done answered these questions. Nearest Walmart, the average is 20 minutes. That surprised me. I expected it to be closer. But the average American, and again, I don't know how thorough this research was, but the average American drives about 20 minutes to the nearest Walmart. You believe in living the American dream? Most would say yes. I have to admit that. And you know something? I think that the more globally minded you become, the more you realize how much you are living the American dream. We are a very prosperous, materialistic nation. Are you tolerant of all races? Americans take pride in saying yes, even though those who don't want illegal immigration are accused of being racist. It's a wrong, politically driven accusation. Can you name the Three Stooges? I can, and most of you, some of you could. By the way, there's a movie, the Three Stooges movie. Is it worth watching? I'll leave that to your judgment. Can you name the three branches? Yeah, you guys did fine on that one. Most cannot. I was surprised by that answer. I really was. That most Americans cannot name the three branches of government. Let's see, they weren't taking notes in class. Do you prefer smooth or chunky peanut butter? Smooth, 83%. Yeah, I like smooth too. You live in the state where you were born? 60% said yes. That also was a high figure. I expected it to be lower because of so much mobility in our country now. So anyway, quite interesting. All right, let's finish this up. In reality, there's no such thing as an average American. It's an idea that is countercultural to individualism. Individualists don't like to be put in a mold. I is who I is. The USA resembles Anglos in the individualistic dimension more than any other. Individualism is the most distinct characteristic. All right, so do's and taboos to finish up here. Do be on time, okay? Unfortunately, I'm born and bred with that. Do allow for plenty of personal space. So you're probably not going to see me coming up to you and saying, okay, Isaac, let's have a chat about the notes here. Let's see how you, yeah, well, get away from me, right? And by the way, I didn't do that in Brazil either. Don't get any wrong ideas. Don't ask people how much money they make. We talked about that before too. You know, people don't want to be judged. Most people don't, unless you happen to be certain people. Don't feel the need to give gifts when meeting a new acquaintance, all right? Just be thankful. Yeah, we invited our neighbor over who they're from Vietnam, wonderful people, really, really sweet neighbors. We invited them over for a meal, and they came over and they brought a dessert with them. That's the culture there. You bring a dessert when you come, and that was really special. All right, questions or comments about the Anglo culture before I turn you loose? Yeah, Pam. Don't like peanut butter? I don't know. You don't like peanut butter? Now, are you allergic to it or just don't like it? You don't like peanut butter, okay. Are you sure you're a true American? Yeah, there are. I would, probably the most famous American sandwich is peanut butter and jelly. PBJ. Yeah, yeah. Now, do you have peanut butter in Peru? Do you guys buy it? Do you make it, or they don't like it? Do you like it? What? Oh, I'm gonna go back and readjust your grade. When I was in school, in high school, my mom. Okay, I was spoiled. My mom made my lunch for me every day, and she would always make me 2 sandwiches, and she would constantly ask. Because I wanted peanut butter and jelly, and she would constantly ask, don't you want, I can make egg salad, I can make ham sandwich, I can make, you know, nope, I want my peanut butter and jelly. Every day, 2 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. But I still love you, Pam. You're still welcome to come to class. All right, thanks, guys. Enjoy your break.